gave over the short version of the Maimah of the Vata right? But this is the main reason why a husband goes to Farbrengen on Shabbos is so that he comes home and gives over what he heard of the Farbrengen to his wife and kids. So I gave over what we learned.
So we should make it into a Farbrengen.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, but Parashat Nesachim is a very interesting mimer that got me working on Shabbos.
Where is Parashat Nesachim?
Nesachim is the jubilations.
Where's it from? What is it?
At the end of our parsha, the end of Parshat Shelach,
Yeah.
after the sin of the spies,
Yeah.
Hashem gives them two mitzvos.
Okay.
One of them is the jubilations, Nesachim, where you add to every korban. You should know this because you're going to be doing this
No, I
soon.
don't know. This is news to me. I've never heard this.
You have to bring wine with every korban.
Who's the Kohanim?
No, the person who's bringing the mincha.
This is a Kohen Shlomim.
Shlomim, every ola.
Chagiga.
What? And Chagiga, also Chagiga Yid, so it's a Shlomim.
Okay, so he brings
The person who's bringing the korban, brings the sacrifice, also brings wine.
I thought that was part of the.
And he brings flour to make.
I thought that was part of the korban.
It's called the Nesachim. Right? Nesachim oto ala
I
mizbech.
didn't know it had a special name. I just thought,
Okay.
Okay.
So it says there, if we had a chumash, I could read the whole parsha for you, but not right now, maybe next time. But Parashat, so why is this mimer interesting? Because it's from Tav Kuf Nun Zayin, meaning it's the year that the Tanya came out. Yeah. It was said in Lojna, obviously, and it's very long. It's like a regular mimer. This is not all of it. I printed wrong. It's 7 pages.
They were long. This was very long.
This is very long. It's not even 2 pages like it usually is in Talich Lojna. And it begs the whole question of what exactly did change after the Alter Rebbe's second arrest. And it begs another question, because it turns out that in the book Talich Lojna there are Maimarim from Samech Aleph, Samech Beis, and even Samech Gimel.
Which sefer is this?
So sefer we learned from last week,
Oh, okay.
which is from before Liadi, before he moved to Liadi.
But the Alter Rebbe didn't put that book together.
Doesn't matter, but it says, but somebody did, and whoever put it together called it Lojna. So what they're saying is that in Samech Aleph, Samech Beis, Samech Gimel, meaning 1801, 1802, 1803, the Alter Rebbe was still saying Maimarim in Lojna. How is that possible even?
When did he leave?
What?
When did he leave? After the arrest.
Yeah, there is. 1801.
So the ones that were said in Lojna before, but they never just got
But the
together.
dates are 1802, 1803. They weren't said before. They were said in 1802, 1803, and somebody put them under Lojna. So there's two possibilities. One possibility
they were
is...
written out in Lojna, and then they were said later.
That could be. No, they were said later, but maybe the person who wrote them lived in Lojna. That could be. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that whoever did the short Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe, which are really all the Maimarim from before 1802, he brings a different svara, which is very interesting, but I don't know where he gets it from. He says, even after he was released, even though he didn't go back to Lojna after he was released the second time in 1801, but he traveled back and forth afterwards. After he settled in Liadi, he still went back a few times. There's no indication of that.
There's a problem with that.
There's a lot of problems with that.
No, there's a very big problem.
Okay.
When Napoleon came and burnt down the whole village. He didn't burn down the whole village.
No, we're talking about much later. Napoleon's 10 years later, 1812. Napoleon doesn't have anything to do with
Why
it.
did he leave? Why did he
We
leave?
said why he left.
Because of the arrest. Okay, so I'm getting mixed up with my dates.
Anyway, so the one option is that maybe he's right, and he traveled back and forth, and it was still some Maimarim that he said in Lojna and not in Liadi. I think my option is easier. The one you just said. That there was the person who wrote these was living in Lozhna at the time, or at least the finalization of the book wasn't printed. It wasn't printed until 1950. Okay, sorry. So the Rebbe printed it. This was never printed, and in fact, the Rebbe didn't even have the original. He had to get one from Yerushalayim. There was a copy of it. It doesn't matter. These are interesting stories for people who like how the history of printing. Not important. The point is that it's very strange that there are Maimarim in there in the Lozhna book that were from 1802 and 1803, long after the Rebbe wasn't there. So okay, so that presents an interesting question.
Majority of the book is Maimarim.
That's another.
Stuffed in at the end because you've got to print them somewhere.
No, so again, why would somebody stuff it at the end if it wasn't Shayach? So the answer would be because the person who wrote this was living in Lozhna, and that's why he put it all together, and that makes a lot more sense. That after the Maimer was said, so there were copies of it sent around.
Right.
So imagine that one of oh, here he is. Look at that. No. You're an engineer, figure it out. There you go.
Who is it? Is your friend?
How you doing? So good to see you. See, I had to do bibliography until you came, because I knew you were coming.
I think we might have met.
Are you Jewish? Or is it a tree for you?
I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Okay.
According
nice to see you.
According to the Israeli government, not so Jewish.
Nice to see you.
According to the Russian government, very Jewish.
Very Jewish.
Okay, so let's start this Maimer,
Right.
which is that's why they kicked him out.
So you figured it out whether it was written?
No,
No.
we have a different. It's an interesting question, but not for now. So now,
There's another answer.
okay.
I just read that the Rebbe of Ashab wrote a letter for Yutes Kislev, and at the time he wasn't in Lubavitch, he was in Moscow doing some business. So he sent the letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe read the letter out in the shul in Lubavitch on Yutes Kislev. And then a lot of the Chabadnikim all over the world heard about the letter and they wanted copies of it. It took them 2 years to get the letters reprinted and published and sent out to everybody. So remember these Maimarim were sitting in the Russian. And maybe by the time there's somebody going around putting them together and writing them up and sorting them all out, the date that's on there is not the date when it was said. It was the date when the final copy
They
was
wouldn't
put
make
together.
that. They wouldn't make that mistake.
No,
It was very important for them to say when this was said, because that was the only way of keeping track of the Maimarim. Because a lot of times the Maimarim start with the same pasuk. They start with the same verse, so you can't tell. So the only way you can tell is by the date. So they were very meticulous about the dates. I don't think there's a problem with the date. That doesn't sound to me possible. Anyway. בפרשת נסחים כתיב כי תבואו אל ארץ מושבותיכם ועשיתם אישה להשם עולה. In the parsha of jubilations, what you add to every korban, you have to bring wine with it, and the wine is poured on the altar.
Why do you call it jubilation?
That's what it's called. I don't know why. That's what they call it.
What's the word in Hebrew?
Nesachim. Nesach al hamizbeach. The Nesach al hamizbeach. Libations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not jubilations. You're right. Libations. Right. So the libations were wine that you added to certain sacrifices. But there it says that when this is after the sin of the spies. And it says there, it's almost like God was telling them, consoling them, that even though you're going to be here for 38 more years, I promise you, in the end, you're going to come to the land of Israel. So, but there it says, "Ki tavou le'eretz moshvotechem," when you come to the land of your dwellings, v'asitem ishe la'Hashem olah. When you come to your land of your dwellings and you bring a sacrifice, a fiery sacrifice.
After the Chaluk.
להבין למה שינה הכתוב לקרוא ארץ ישראל כאן בשם ארץ מושבותיכם יותר מבכל התורה שנקראת ארץ כנען. So why does it here call the land of Israel the land of your dwellings, and not call it the way it usually does, the land of Canaan? What's the difference? Meaning, in other words, if we understand that the land of Canaan is the title that the land of Israel has before the Jewish people enter it.
This is the thing that always confused me and upset me. What was it ever referred to as the land of Canaan?
All the time, from the time
Why?
that Abraham is. So the reason is because.
It was given to Shem. Why?
Right. So the
Just
whole.
because they chop the land doesn't mean that they.
Right. And Canaan, he's a Hamite.
Can.
Right. So the way the Torah is not afraid, or Judaism in general is not afraid of
Labeling?
how should I say it?
Acknowledging.
Of acknowledging origins. It's not afraid of it. And even when the origins are mistaken, even like in this case, it was taken by force. Why? Because it has a way of making it into something positive. The Torah is not afraid, because everything in the end can be positive. So what's positive about it being the land of Canaan? Because Canaan means hachna. It means submission. So what is it saying about this land? And this we learned in depth.
They were anything but submissive.
Not the people. We don't care about the people. The people represented that the land was submissive in the sense that, like the Jewish animal soul, it's submissive. It's willing to take on the yoke of heaven. The land represents the animal soul. Once it's taken on the yoke of heaven, it becomes Eretz Yisrael. It becomes the land of Israel. Okay? But that's again, we're not afraid of any of the
So it's a
of the
process
labels.
of rectification.
Right. So if in the process of rectification went through the wrong hands, that's also okay. We'll also deal with it. And it's a whole issue with how to understand Judaism. Is Judaism an original thought, or is it the rectified thought? What's it doing? Is it saying something original? Sometimes it is. Or is it mostly rectifying what already exists in the world? And if Judaism was something that was the original thought,
It has to be rectification.
then you would expect Adam to be a Jew. But he's not. So Hashem gave him a chance. Let's see what you do. After you mucked it up, as you say in Australia, right? Or do they say that?
Slightly differently. That's
really?
that's a very polite way of saying it.
Oh, but you use that.
Yeah,
I've heard you say
That's
that.
a very polite
So
way of saying
you're a
it.
polite guy, so I pick up your polite language. So after you've screwed it all up,
Oh,
there you
that's
go.
how they say it.
So now we'll come and we'll fix it. And there's a way to fix it. Life is also that way. Again, you spend the first 20 years of your life pretty much subservient to your animal soul, and then you suddenly grow a brain. And at least your brain tells you you can't let the animal soul rule your life, so you've got to get your act together. You can't keep drinking beer at 8 o'clock in the morning. You can't eat pizza at 2 in the morning. You can't sit and play video games all day long. You have to actually do something with life. So then you grow a brain, as they say. That's not Yiddishkeit yet. That's just the first stage of being a mensch, just being a human being. After that you begin to understand that there's a purpose to life, that you didn't come here for nothing. You don't just have to survive, you actually have to do something. So then you begin to grow a soul. And when you grow the soul, then you begin to become Jewish. Then you become something else. So everything goes through that process. So the land of Israel also went through that process. In the beginning, though, it has to be accepting to being submissive, to taking on the yoke of heaven. If it's not amenable to that, then he can't work with it. That's why Abraham loved this land when he saw it. So he saw it was called the land of Canaan then. And it says, V'akna'aniyaz ba'aretz. It says that when Abraham came, the Canaanites were all over this land. But he wasn't deterred by that. He said, on the contrary, the name makes sense, the land itself makes sense. And what did he see? He saw that people work the land. That's the sage's way of saying that it's workable. There's something to work with here. In the other lands, you didn't have to work. It didn't submit. What does it mean? It came too easily. If you were in the land between between the Euphrates and the what do you call it? Chidekel.
Egypt, you're talking about.
No. And what's it called? How do you say Chidekel in English? No, that's the Prat. What's the other name of the other river? Anyway, Mesopotamia. No, Nile's in Egypt. What's the name of the big river? I don't know why I can't remember. Anyway, the Euphrates and the Tigris. So in that area, it was too easy. You didn't have to work hard. The only thing they had to work for was to make stones. There's no stones there. Think about it. There's no stones.
We make stones.
There's no stone.
Okay, well,
There's no natural stone. You have to take clay and you have to make bricks.
Ah. So it's not stone.
So
Okay.
you can't make stone. You can't make natural stone. Think about that. People in America also don't get this, but because America is also very rich. At least I don't know how England is, but I think it's almost the same as America. There's a lot of topsoil. There's tons of topsoil. In Eretz Yisrael, there is no topsoil.
It's sand.
Sand? It's stone from the moment it's hard stone from the moment you can't dig in it.
London is built on chalk.
No.
There's no topsoil.
Okay.
It's all chalk.
So it's London. But you don't grow anything in London, as far as I know.
Built on swamp.
Anyway, I have a different suggestion.
Yeah.
You can take it or leave it. You'll probably leave it. The land is called Canaan, and then the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave it to Aaron, to Abraham,
Yeah.
to demonstrate it doesn't make any difference what it's called now, or whatever's living there.
Okay.
When the time comes that Hashem wants to give it, so he's not embarrassed, he's not going to pay it, he's
Good,
not worried
not
about
too.
exactly the same way as this land,
That's also
which
true.
is called
100% true.
Land of the Zionists.
Except that's not explained in Chassidus. At least I've never seen it. But it's true. It's true.
So she says it. Says it first.
He said it, but it doesn't say it because of
Then
that.
he took it away.
That's the principle, but he doesn't say it about the name.
So we'll take this one.
Okay,
We'll give it
that's
to
fine.
the Charedim.
Change the name to Eretz Shach, whatever you want. Call it whatever you want. Anyway, but that's why it's called Eretz Canaan. But here suddenly he calls it Eretz Moshvotechem. So just from that, this introduction, so we understand that it means that you've gone past the stage of submission. Meaning, libations have something to do with what's beyond submission. Okay, that's the idea here. It's no longer called Eretz Canaan, it's called the land of your dwellings. It doesn't call it Eretz Yisrael because it's not called Eretz Yisrael until much later. But he doesn't call it the land of Canaan anymore.
When was it called Eretz Yisrael?
When was the first time it was called Eretz Yisrael? I don't know. Somewhere in the Nach.
Joshua probably.
Joshua probably called it already. Probably not because, or maybe yes. So in Brachos it says like this. There's a Gemara that says something really interesting. It says, Kol hakoreh kriyat shema velo tefillin. Anybody who says kriyat shema without putting tefillin on, ki'ilu ikriv olah belo mincha. It's as if he brought a fiery offering without the bread offering that goes with it. You have to bring bread with it, 30, 40 loaves of bread. V'zevach velo nesachim. And it's as if he brought an offering, a general offering, without the libations. So again, the analogy here is that Kriyas Shema, reading Kriyas Shema, is like bringing the offering, and tefillin are like the libation. So what's the connection between libation and tefillin? Why? Yeah, you could also ask what's the connection between an offering and Kriyas Shema, and saying Shema. וצריך להבין עניין דמיון זה, we have to understand this analogy, זה שמדמה קריאת שמע לעולה וזבח, ותפילין למנחה ונצחים. We have to understand the analogy. והנה עניין הקורבנות. So first of all, we have to understand קורבנות a little bit better. שהיה יורד אש מן השמיים על גבי המזבח, ותאכל את העולה ואת חלבי השלמים. The point in a korban, in a sacrifice, is that, and we actually learned this last week, I don't know if you watched it, but we, especially on Friday, we had this incredible insight from the Alter Rebbe. He's going to repeat it now. It's amazing. He repeats it. Same thing, just without the same introduction, but same idea. That when fire comes down from above, what's fire from above? Fire from above means a person has an awakening from above. And it burns the offering on the altar and the fat. That's what Kriyas Shema is supposed to do. Kriyas Shema is an awakening from above. Very interesting. We think that we're saying Kriyas Shema. He's saying no. Kriyas Shema is 6 words, 25 letters that you received from Hashem, and so when you say it, it awakens you from above. What were you saying?
No, I was just going to say that. It presupposes the fact that we are the receptacles.
Right. And we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So what do we say? What's the big difference between the Middle Ages and Chassidus? That in the Middle Ages, you had the Rambam who said the epitome of being a human being is consciousness, is knowledge. If you can reach a certain level of knowledge, you've reached the highest level of being a human. What does Chassidus say? It's not about knowledge. It's about performing mitzvos. Why? Because your knowledge, your mind is not great enough to fully comprehend godliness. But when godliness comes down to you, you can be a receptacle. You can be a vessel. So that's why the thinking changed. It wasn't just a Chassidus thing. There were a lot of people who were against the Rambam's statement that the whole meaning of being a human, of being a Jew, is you took it from Aristotle, and there was the big opposition to the Rambam was a lot because of that, because he thought that was the epitome. Obviously, this needs to be explained. We explained it actually not long ago exactly what the story was. In any case, so here you have that the receptacle.
And yet, he's the codifier.
Yeah, he's the first one, maybe, to codify, according to a certain order. But it wasn't
we hold by him.
No, we don't rule by him at all.
Not rule, but we hold by him.
Very little.
Really?
He's held as a great mind, but he's not a leader in that sense.
Wasn't he accepted at one stage as a definitive authority?
No. The Beis Yosef compiled his work that became the Shulchan Aruch from the Rambam and the Rif and the Rosh.
Yes.
So he's at least 1/3, but he's not. Only the Teimanim had the tradition of ruling according to him. But even they would find it difficult to rule according to his guide to the perplexed. His philosophical views were very interesting, but they also are very important in world philosophy. But again, in Yiddishkeit he was always taken with a grain of salt. And in the Tanya he says that even though he's in opposition to Kabbalah, where Kabbalah again puts the human mind as very limited, that's the starting point. Still, Chassidus finds a way to bring him back in. That he also fits with Kabbalah. How do we say that his mind goes all the way only up to the world of Bria, and for him, Bria, what's above Bria is already godly. Yeah, that's a general way of understanding that whatever you don't understand, you say
outside the realm of your understanding,
you call it God. That's how it works. So for the Rambam, the highest level was Bria, the world of creation, and the world of creation is the world of thought. Above that, Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, he didn't have. So for him, that was already God. Okay. Where we say...
That's not wrong.
It's not wrong, it's just partial. It's just we have more understanding now. So since we have a description of Atzilus, what's in Atzilus? In Atzilus, in emanation, everything is godly. But the main thing is the mitzvos. Okay. So...
That's the part he missed.
He didn't miss it because he look at the tremendous importance he placed on telling people exactly how to do everything. So he had tremendous importance for the mitzvahs. But still, philosophically, he felt that learning was greater than performing a mitzvah. Very interesting.
Took the Talmud and condensed it to...
So, it's not so much smaller what he condensed it into. In any case. So now we have this idea that
38 out of the 72.
No, he's the only one who totally brought every single halacha.
Oh, yeah?
That's his claim to fame, is that there have only been 2 codifiers who have written a halacha work that includes all the laws. He and the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Epstein from the 19th century. Nobody else did this. It's very interesting. Nobody tried to encompass everything. In any case, so what's the idea here? That we're a receptacle for the light that comes down when we say Kriya Shema, just as the altar is a receptacle for the fire that comes down from the heavens when you bring a sacrifice. V'inei, sorry.
Tefillin is the Mizbeach.
No.
And the fire is the
Tefillin are
Shema.
like the libations. The question is why.
Tefillin is like the libation.
So now he gives
what's
us.
the Mizbeach?
The Mizbeach is not part of it here. Ki hinei adam hu murkab me'arba yesodot. Man is made out of 4 elements. Again, this is 18th century science. 18th century, there's no yet periodic table of elements. And the science that the Alter Rebbe mentions is always the science of the sages. The science of the sages is a Greek science. Again, not because anybody thought it was written in stone, but because it gave a good representation of the physical world that was good enough for their times. Because they didn't have to build a TV or a smartphone. All they needed to do was light a fire. So man is made out of 4 elements. What are the 4 elements? Esh, ruach, mayim, afal. Fire, wind, water, and earth. They're also the early etymology, not etymology, the early classification system of inanimate and vegetable and animal life, and the speaker, man. And they correspond to the 4 letters of God's essential name, Havaya. So, interesting here. Here he switches the order. There's a lot of times he does this. You would think that the order is fire on top, then wind, or air, and then water, and then earth. But a lot of times the air and the fire are switched. Why? Because man is a speaker. So it's understood that being able to speak is that God blew into him the breath of life. And man is the highest level in the classification. He's a speaker, and it's above the animal life. So you also have to switch air and fire for that to work.
But that makes complete sense because...
Not in the Greek system. I don't know of anywhere in the Greek system that they switched air and fire to account for that.
No, but if we're saying that the fire represents Hashem coming down and accepting the korban, the Kriya Shema, then everything done before then is the build-up to that event. It can't happen before.
Okay.
It has to happen last.
So the fire would be the highest.
The last, you're right.
But we're not saying that.
We're not?
Saying the opposite. Saying that the air and the fire switch places. And the air goes above the fire. Why is the air above the fire? Because it represents man, and man is higher than the animal life. Why is fire likened to animal life? Because it's animate, as opposed to wind, which is less animate.
But in context of the offering we're talking about, no? We already moved
No,
on.
we're just saying in general. Because he wants to get into a whole topic now, which is a very interesting topic called entropy. He wants to talk about this a little. Why does he want to talk about this? Because he wants us to understand what our problem is. Our problem is that we're too complex. We're too complex.
We make life difficult.
No, we're that too. I mean, that's an outgrowth of being too complex. But being too complex means that you have a lot of entropy. I mean, the simpler something is, the longer it survives. Take a piece of stone, lie around for 1,000,000 years. Nothing will happen to it. Why? Because it's very simple. There's nothing there. The order, the amount of energy that went into creating the order in the stone is very little. So it survives. You don't need much energy to keep it the way it is. But a human being is very, very complex. You need a lot of energy expended every day to keep it together. And eventually, it wears out. It's hard to keep. bits of it, until eventually the whole thing goes haywire. It's just too complex. Human beings are the most complex form of existence in the material world. There's nothing as complex as a human being. If you look far and wide, right? What's the whole idea? That the brain is the most complex structure in the universe. The universe itself is a million billion times less complex than the brain. So we have this problem that we're made out of 4 elements. That's how they used to call it. Today, if we would translate this into modern science, we'd say the 4 elements: fire, air, or in this case, air, fire, water, and earth. So they're the 4 basic elements in man. What are they? Very simple. The earth is the nitrogen, because nitrates are the main part of what's in the earth. The water is obviously hydrogen. It's even what hydrogen means water. In this case, the fire would be carbon, because that's what fire consumes. It lives off of carbon. And the air would be oxygen, because that's the main thing that we breathe. If you take that and you ask how much of man is made out of these 4 elements, you come to 99.5%. Another percent is sulfur and phosphorus, right? And then you've got trace elements. They basically make up the DNA. You need sulfur and phosphorus to make up the DNA, so there's a lot of it. And then there's trace elements like selenium and magnesium and iron and this, and then they're trace. Like they're all less than 0.1%. Okay, so that also fits somewhat with what we know today. V'hinei k'tiv, and it says Srafim omdim. You mentioned the Haftarah on Shabbos. What does the Haftarah say? The Haftarah says that Zechariah, the prophet, he sees a vision of Yoshua the high priest, and he's wearing soiled clothing.
Jeremiah.
No, Zechariah.
Zechariah?
Yeah. He's wearing soiled clothing. And he has the Satan standing next to him, meaning his evil inclination standing next to him, trying to subvert him from serving Hashem. What's this image? So everybody says it's very simple. The sages say in Sanhedrin, in Daf Tzadik Gimel 93, it says there that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to test him. He was the high priest. He was the high priest. So he wanted to test him. Actually, he didn't want to test him. He wanted to test 2 other people. One was called Achav, but it's not the king Achav. It's Achav ben Akaliah. I can't remember his name. And who was the third one? And Tzidkiyahu, I think. I don't remember exactly. Who was
jumping around between the ages, but okay.
No, not at all.
Yeshua and Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeshua Kohen Gadol. Yeshua, who brought us into Eretz Yisrael, was after Moshe Rabbeinu, and he wasn't a Kohen. He was from the Shevet Ephraim. Here we're talking about after the destruction of the first temple. They went to Babylon, and there was still people who had positions.
Right.
So he wanted to test them. He said, 25 years ago or 20 years ago, I, Nebuchadnezzar, tested these 3 people whose name was Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I threw them into the fiery furnace, and they came out unscathed. Let's see if you're just as holy as they are. Yeah. So they said to him, he wanted to test 2 of them, Achav and Tzidkiyahu, I think. Remember who that? I think it was Tzidkiyahu. So he says to them, I'm going to throw you in and let's see what happens. So he said to him, we can't. It's not the same test. You got to be scientific about this, right? They were 3. We're only 2. The miracle only works when there's 3, right? Who should I bring? Bring Yoshua. Why did they choose him? Because he was known to be very holy, and they were hoping that thanks to him they would be saved. They'd cling to him, and he'd save them. So he throws them into the fiery furnace, and they die, and he comes out burnt a little. His clothing was burnt. So that's what it means that he was with soiled clothing. That's how the sages interpret this. Mm-hmm. Why was his clothing burnt? Because children had not married Jewish women. When they went to Babylon, so they already married non-Jewish women. So that was his soiled clothing. And that's why the Satan is standing next to him to subvert him. Because even if a person, there's a lot of explanations. The Nodab Yehuda gives a long explanation about this. There's a lot of stuff about this.
His advice is for his kids to divorce his wife.
Right. So he has to get his kids back on the right path. Why am I saying all this? Because if you read it carefully, you'll see that this is where we get the idea that man is dynamic and angels are not. It's this Haftarah that says it. But in the beginning it says Yoshua was standing next to the angel that was prophesizing Zechariah. He sees that there's an angel who's doing the prophecy, and that's what he sees in the prophecy. So that angel, Yoshua, in the prophecy, he's standing next to the angel. What do you mean standing? So the Chida says, from here you see that when a person has sins, he's like an angel. He's stuck. Can't move. He's standing just like an angel. And then the whole prophecy, that's what the whole prophecy, the beginning of the prophecy was meant to do, was meant to explain, to tell Zechariah that Hashem is open to rectification. If you change your ways, if you fix what you need to fix, I will give you the ability to move amongst these standing angels. And then you'll become a human being. So when you have sin, you actually become an angel. It's a very strange thing, right? You don't become a very good angel. You become a category. You become a prosecuting angel. But you yourself turn into an angel because you're stagnant, because you can't move anymore. Meaning, what happens? That when you're full of sin, you lose from your entropy. You lose from your energy. You become more entropic. What happens to you is you lose degrees of freedom. The more sins a person does, the more degrees of freedom he loses, until eventually he becomes stagnant. That's what happens to people in old age, right?
So when we say that an imprisoned person cannot take himself out, you require somebody else to do it.
He needs to do tshuva.
So
that's what he's saying here. That you have to get something from above.
Right.
Even tshuva requires that there's an awakening from above. Where does it start? Krishna.
Right.
The fact that you say Krishna, that's a chance to get out of your imprisonment. It's a chance to start moving again. Okay? So that's why when you say Krishna, what do you meditate on at the end? That is on all directions. That Hashem is one in all directions, and that you have a mission to do. Everything is Hashem, and you need to manifest Hashem's will. So the angels are called Srafim Omdim. They're standing. Why are they standing? Because they're only one thing. They have no degrees of freedom. Again, they're very good angels because they only do one good thing. But in general, if a person becomes stagnant, it means he becomes like an angel. And it's not a good thing. So these angels, Nikraim Srafim, why are they called fiery angels, Srafim? Because it means to burn up. Because they are from the fire, from the element of fire. And they're always excited. What are they excited about? Because they have one thought from the creation until now. They've had one thought. What's their one thought? Each one is different. But they have one thought. They never change that thought. What is it? They contemplate God, and they have one thought about God. Mm-hmm. What was it? It reminded me when I read this on Shabbos. It reminded me of Zusha. Okay.
What about it?
Zusha used to sit in front of the same page of Talmud.
Yeah.
And he sat in front of it for 2-3 days. And he never turned the page. So people said to him, Zusha, you might want to turn the page. There's news. There's other stuff on the other side. So if you would have said that, it would have been okay. But it says, as Zusha used to say, no, what's wrong where I am?
Right.
That's stagnant. That's being stagnant. So maybe you can enjoy it, but now you're like an angel. Again, for Zusha, it didn't mean that he was Chaz V'Shalom, he'd done an Avera. It just means that he's so locked into this pleasure of understanding one idea in Torah, that he doesn't move. And that happens to people, that sometimes you find a very holy person and they're stuck. And you know what? Most of the holy people are that way. Okay? The big difference between the Rebbe and most of the holy people in our generations was that most of them, they want to stay at home and learn. That's all they want to do. They're not going anywhere. Again, it's not because they have a Yetzer Hara. It's not because they did something wrong. It's because they stagnate over time. They have less and less, they get so much pleasure from where they are, like Zusha, that they don't want to move anywhere. It's not, they don't stagnate because they did something wrong. They become so engrossed in this one type of pleasure.
But that's also...
So they become like angels.
But that's also against the, I guess, the forethought about creating man. Man is supposed to be moving.
Right. That's what he wants. He wants us to move. Right, that's what he says. Anyway, the end of the story was that he indeed, Yoshua, got his children.
He got his new turban on.
And then he got new clothing. He got new clothing. Hashem forgave him, and then he was able to serve again as the high priest in the temple, in the second temple that was being rebuilt.
So he came back with Ezra.
Yeah, sure.
Ezra was the leader of the generation.
He was, but he wasn't the high priest. I don't remember. Maybe in the first year when he was there, but afterwards it was.
Ezra didn't first. By the way, Ezra didn't come straight away. Ezra came later.
Okay.
When his teacher died.
In any case, והיינו מפני שאין להם כי אם יסוד אחד פשוט שהוא יסוד האש האלוקים ואינם מורכבים. So again, why are the angels so engrossed in one thing and they don't move, and they haven't moved since the 6 days of creation? Because they're simple. They have only one element. He says in this case, if he's a seraph, then he has one element of fire. מה שאין כן האדם, but man is not that way, שהוא מורכב מארבע יסודות, because man is complex, he's made out of all 4 elements. וגם הוא מלובש בגוף הנפש החיונית, and he has a body, and the body is certainly very complex. לא יוכל לעמוד במדרגה ומחשבה אחת כל יום. I mean, he's saying here 2 things. He's saying the soul of man is more complex. Okay? The soul of man is more complex than the soul of an angel. And man also has a body. So the entropy here is not just in the physical, it's also in the spiritual. אך הנה מכל מקום יש בכוח נפשו האלוקית הצמאון מיסוד האש, כרשפי אש שלהבת, יותר מהמלאכים. Nonetheless, even though man is complex, and we're not made out of just fire, we have more burning excitement than the angels do. How is that possible? כי אף שלמטה הנה מדרגת האדם גרועה ופחותה ממדרגת המלאכים, היינו מפני שלמטה הוא מלובש בגוף ונפש החיונית. So he says, even though here below, because we have a physical body, we perceive less, and so we have less excitement. אבל שורש נשמתו, but the source of the soul, the root of the soul, למעלה, כל אחד ואחד לפי מדרגתו, שלא כל הנשמה היא מלובשת בגוף, רק הערה ממנה, והשורש נשאר למעלה ממקור חוצבה בעולם העליון שממנו נלקחה. והנשמות שבכל עולם ועולם הם ביתר שאת ומעלה לאין קץ על מדרגת המלאכים שבעולמות ההם. והן הן אותן הנשמות עצמן שמתפשט הרתם להתלבש למטה בעולם הזה. He says, but the root of the soul is much higher than any angel. Why? Because souls, now we're not going to get into the description, but there's a whole mitzvah of Priya Viravia, of being fruitful and multiplying, which Tzemach Tzedek has a long explanation about. But the short explanation is that the souls of angels come from kissing, and the souls of man come from coupling. They come from the Yesodot, and the Yesod contains everything. I mean, in the kissing, it's a fleeting connection.
It's a prelude.
And it's only a fleeting connection. It's very shallow. But man is already, again, this as a metaphor. Above, more was invested in creating the soul of man, meaning that, like we said, even the soul of man is much more complex than the soul of an angel. So this thing that comes down when you say Kriyas Shema, this fire that comes down, what is that? That's the source, the root of the soul that comes down into you when you say Kriyas Shema. Okay, what time is it?
9:00.
Okay, we have to end. Because I have a couple coming here. A couple of people.